Well, hello everybody, it's G Bear, Homesteading the Desert. Welcome back to another installment. Today, we're going to talk wind and solar. I got a question from Forever North's Plant and Wildlife Sanctuary, and he said that he didn't know much about wind and solar electricity, but he did buy a 400 watt turbine. Well, that's what I'm supposed to have up there, and you can see that it is spinning and doing its thing here in the light winds we're having today, on and off. And real quick, I'll turn around and show you we got thunder clouds building all the way around us. But there's no call for rain except on my little weather station inside. Back to the wind and solar. As you can see, my solar panels here, these sets here down in the front, those are Harbor Freight, and each one is 25 watts of power at 12 volts. So 4 of those make 100 watts. 4 more make 100 watts. Those are 100 watt panels back there, 12 volts each. So there's 3 more up there. So I got 500 watts sitting on this unit. I got 600 watts sitting over there. I got 45 watts over there. Those are the old Harbor Freight panels, 15 watts each. There's 45 watts there. And then I have 2 panels on top of this shed right here. They're 100 watt panels just like these over here. So there's 200 plus 500 is 700. That's 1,345 watts, or 1.3 kilowatts. A kilowatt is 1,000 watts. All right, that being said, this turbine up here is a 3-wire AC, alternating current turbine. And I'm going to show you down here, the wires that come out of that are all the same color, and they're not designated positive, negative, or ground, or anything like that. They're just, all 3 are the same color. So it doesn't matter what order you hook those up to into a controller. Unlike solar panels that have a black and a red wire coming out, as you see here. So that red would be positive and black would be negative. So those are have specific polarity, and they have to be hooked up correctly. The AC units over there with 3 wires, all the same color, coming out, can be hooked up any sequence you want to your controller. All right. That being said, we'll move on inside here. I don't want to confuse you. There's turbines that are 3-wire and what are called 2-wire. But the 3-wire has the 3 black wires with no designated poles on them. They're just 3 the same color. Whereas, I set these up as a demonstration, whereas a 2-wire actually would still have 3 wires. It's going to have the positive, the negative, and a ground. Okay? But that's considered a 2-wire DC turbine. So this one has to be hooked up in proper polarity. You would hook the red to the positive connector on your controller, black to the negative controller, and then the green one would go to earth ground. You would have to have a ground rod driven in the ground to connect your green wire. Just remember, green, GR, ground, GR. So when you see a green wire in DC voltage, green is always ground. Red is always positive. Black is always negative, just like jumper cables. When you have your jumper cables for batteries, you're going to have a red handle and a black handle, positive, negative. Okay, we're past that. Now we're going to come up here, and right now, I'm going into this waterproof solar controller here with the turbine out there. And you can see my 2 probes are stuck into, you can choose any 2 of the wires. You can mix and match them. You can take the black one out and put it down to this one. Take the red one, put it down to that one, or vice versa. It doesn't matter what combination of 2 wires you go across. But you will set your voltmeter on AC volts 200. And you see the voltage here is sprinting all over the place. Okay, so that's the output of the alternator in AC volts. But the reason it's sprinting all over is because of the speed. Now when you buy a 300 or a 400 watt turbine or wind generator, they say 300, 400 watts. That's not what you're going to get when that thing just first starts turning. That rating that whatever they specify it at is what the maximum output of that turbine will be when it gets up to its stall wind speed. When it's as fast as those blades will allow it to turn, your output will be whatever they said the rating of that wind turbine is. So being a 400 watt, the type of blades I have on mine stall out at about 29 miles per hour. So at 29 miles per hour, I will be getting 400 watts. Okay, so anything under that, I'm going to be getting lower voltages. And this thing can go up as high as, I've seen it up at 37 volts. But right now, because of the slow wind we have, we're only getting 16 volts per leg, or per 2 legs on this thing, AC current. Now this is a PWM controller, and it's a hybrid controller, which means it'll handle wind and solar. Okay, solar, wind and solar. This is an MPPT controller, and I'm going to give you the difference between those in a second here. And this one is also the same. Now the difference on this one also is, here's where you would hook your wind turbine, 3 wires, in any order you want to put them in there. Then these two, you'd have 2 wires running off of there, going to an overload dump load. So if this turbine started spinning way out of control and making way too much electricity, instead of blowing up the batteries, it's going to send the excess electricity out through these 2 wires, and they would go to something like this. This is a heating element, and it would just disperse that electricity as heat into the air. Okay, it's just a safety precaution so you don't blow your batteries up. You see right now, because of the overcast skies, and I've got everything running inside the cabin. I'm running off of this battery bank here, and I'll explain that in a minute. But I've still got 12.8 volts in my battery bank, and I'm using a 12 volt system. 12.6 volts is full batteries. That means your batteries are at peak. They're as perfect charged as they were when they were brand new off the shelf. Now our wind has died, and we're down to only 0.2 of a volt coming out of that turbine up there. So that's one thing that you have to know, and you have to know about your controllers. This one came with the turbine. I don't like using it because all it has is these little lights down here that are supposed to come on to tell you when it's running off the battery, when it's actually giving you a charge. If it's discharging, this big light comes on. And then this is an infrared connection where you can have a gauge inside the cabin to where you can see what type of voltage you have in your system. But also the connections on this, if you'll notice, here's the solar. So the positive goes to the solar, the positive goes to the battery, the positive goes to the load. So you got your positive wire here, the red one coming out, has to go into a junction of extra wires to go to all the different places it has to. And then it shows the negative here from the solar is just goes to ground. The turbine goes to the 3 green wires. They're all the same color, remember, but they put them green on this controller for some reason, and green is not a good color for using for powered lines. Green means ground, but they on this unit here say, who knows, it made in China or whatever. And this is DC 12 or 24 volts. So this automatically determines whether you're using a 12 volt system or a 24 volt system, and it controls that. All right, no matter how you look at it, whenever you have a 3-wire system coming off of a wind turbine, the first thing you have to go through is what's called a rectifier. These units, the PWM and the MPPT and the waterproof unit, all have built-in rectifiers at these connections. What a rectifier does simply is it converts AC to DC. So you got 3 wires of AC coming in, it changes it down to DC and puts it out to the battery. All right, that's all that rectifier does. Now you can actually have, if say you use one of these controllers, you can use a rectifier, and you can use a voltage controller, It's kind of crazy. It's so easy to buy one of these. MPPTs will cost more than a PWM because they are better and more efficient. All right. Now, the PWM stands for pulse width modulation, and what that does is it pulses, turns on and off, on and off. It's like a giant switch that takes the electricity coming into it, turns it on and off, so that it doesn't overload the batteries. It does it very quickly, multiple times per second. That was what they first came out with for controllers on these things. MPPT now. That means maximum power point tracking. And what that does is it tracks the voltage coming in and then distributes it properly. Now, the nice thing about an MPPT is when you have over voltage coming in, it actually converts that voltage to amperage, and that amperage boosts your amps that you would be normally using up when you run items. Okay, and you remember simple electricity, the PIE, power equals voltage times amps. Okay, so if you take the voltage of something, multiply it times the amps of that's being put out, and that'll tell you how many watts that you can run on that. And you can reverse that around. You could take something that's rated for 100 watts, and you can take a 10-volt battery and divide 10 into 100, and that gives you 10 amps. Okay, so then you can run something at a maximum of 10 amps. All right, this is another type of charge control unit, and this is called a dump load unit. And they use a PWM on this because when this one, when your settings on this reach the maximum over voltage on this unit, what it does is it sends the power down to this little solenoid, and all a solenoid is just like on your car, it's a voltage regulator. And when that sends power out through these two units, it's going to close an electromagnetic switch inside here and send power through these lines. So one of these would be connected to the positive pole of your batteries, and the other one would be connected to the positive pole of whatever you wanted to run. All right. Then the negatives, of course, would all be tied together. And they got the negative here as a green. It should be a black, not a green, because it's not ground, it's negative. Okay, so this would go to the positive pole of the battery, negative pole of the battery. All right. So now you would have a switch here that would make a connection between this point and this point when this solenoid closes, and it would send electricity from the batteries to a heating element, something like that, or a water heater element, and use up that electricity until it dropped below the setting on your charger, and then it would automatically shut or actually open the switch here. It would click off, and then the power would go back to you charging your batteries instead of going to the heating element. All right. I think that's about as simple as I can explain this to you. And just remember, you'd like to go with an MPP charger, or you can buy a separate controller designed specifically for turbine straight to batteries. And you will have 3 connectors on one side of it for your 3 incoming wires, any 3 colors or any 3 combination you want to use. And then you'd have only 2 connectors at the bottom, which just go straight to your batteries. And the controller would have everything set up inside of it that would make sure that you would only be putting out 15 volts DC to your batteries, which is what's required to charge a 12-volt battery. I run a 12-volt system because I have a lot of large power tools that use high amperage. They're 13 amp systems and things like that. And that's why I have to use such large wires. The smaller wires like this on an AC system is because I'm not really running a lot of amperage. I'm bringing voltage in, not amperage. So I can use smaller wires. When I need amps, I've got to up my wire sizes, and that's why my batteries are tied together with larger wires. Okay, on to the batteries. The batteries, I've mentioned this before. I set my 12 volt system up. These are all 6 volt batteries, and you can tell a 6 volt battery because each cell in a battery is, in a lead acid battery, is 2 volts. So there's 3 cells in here. That's 2, 4, 6. That's a 6 volt battery. 2, 4, 6. That's a 6 volt battery. But look here. I have a positive connected to a negative from one battery to the other. So that left me a positive and a negative. Okay, so now these 2 batteries become one 12 volt battery. Okay, so now I've got a 12 volt battery instead of a 6 volt battery. Now these US batteries are rated at 232 amp hours each. Now, as I explained once before in an older video, when you tie them together like this in series, that's a series connection when you go positive to negative across these 2 and tie the 2 together to make one larger battery, you're going to increase the voltage, but you're not going to increase the amperage. So even though this one says 232 and this one says 232, because I tied them together now, the 2 together are only 232. So I'm getting 232 amp hours out of 2 batteries instead of 464 that I would get if I had them hooked up in parallel, which is positive to positive, negative to negative. But that would only keep me at 6 volts. Most of the stuff I want to run is at 12 volts. And I like having a 12 volt system because I have a little backup pulsar generator down there. That's a 2-cycle 12 volt generator. And if I have to, and I need an emergency charge on these batteries, I can kick that on real quick, fire it off, and let it run, and that thing runs for 8 hours on a tank full. So for 8 hours I could charge my batteries if I had to in an emergency. And if that wasn't an option, I always keep behind the door here, I keep a long set of jumper cables for a vehicle. So I could pull my vehicle right up here to the door, hook those cables on, tie the red to the positive, the black to the negative at any one of these locations, and I could charge this battery bank using the motor alternator in the van. That's why I stayed at a 12 volt system. I have all that backup, but also I wanted the amps. I needed higher amps to run my power tools. And the voltage I'm not too concerned about. All right, last in line here. And if you have any questions about any of this stuff you want specifically answered, feel free to, down at the bottom, give me a thumbs up and leave a comment or a question down there. And I try to answer everybody as quickly as possible. Unless it's some jerk that's being a troll, then I just ignore them. All right, I'm going to show you. This is my inverter. Now this inverts the 12 volt DC current voltage coming out of these batteries, goes into this system, positive and negative. You see how heavy my wires are. That's 1-aught wire, on a 2-aught wire. And that's because of the amount of amps that's being put in. Okay, so I got those tied together, and then I got jumpers running to the other units, because I can tie 2 battery banks to this one big unit. This is a power jack. They had some bad rep in the past, but this one is a great one. This is the 8,000 watt LF. Okay, so this is 120 amps, 8,000 watts, and then it has a 32,000 watt surge, peak surge on this. So in other words, if I had to kick something up that uses 30,000 watts, which is a lot of electricity, this thing should hold it. Now, because I run a 240 volt system going into my electric panel, because I am 100% off grid. I do not have any electric poles coming in here. Okay, you can see here, this is upside down. I'm sorry, but that's the way this thing had to sit. But you can still see the wattage right now being drawn off of it is 166 watts at 231.5 volts. That's a 240 volt system. So you see my wires coming out here. These are what go in and charge the panel inside. And I have 2 reds, 2 whites, and 2 blacks. Okay, the whites on an AC side or alternating current side are neutrals. The reds will be one hot leg and the blacks will be the other hot leg. So in my electrical panel inside, there are 2 bus bars that come down, one on each side. So I can put breakers on this side and breakers on this side. The reds go to one side. I put the reds on the right, RR, and then I put the black on the left side. And that gives me, I know which wires are coming from where to what inside the panel. Normally they would be black, black, and white. And that's what you would have coming into your house. But I did the red because, first of all, I had some number 6 red laying around here, or a number 6 coax laying around here. And I doubled them up because I wanted the amperage going into my panel. So putting those 2 6s together boosted my wire size. And in wire, you go down, the numbers that go down, the larger the wire gets. So 4 is a larger wire than a 6, and 2 is a larger wire than a 4. So it's a little confusing, but that's the way it works. Okay, last thing on wiring. DC voltage should always run through stranded wire. Okay, this is stranded wire. You want to always use stranded wire for DC voltage, because DC voltage runs through the center of the wire and then spreads out to the other wires. Okay, AC voltage should run through solid wire, because it runs around the outside of a solid core piece of wire, copper wire, and that's what you get your least resistance for on AC or alternating current. So remember those things. And you can see my solid wire here on my grounds. All these grounds tie to everything to ground, and they all go out the back of the cabin here, and I have a 6-foot copper plated ground rod driven into the ground, and everything is tied to that. I'll take you out there very quickly to show you that. But I also have other things like my antenna here for my TV antenna. I have that grounded right there with a piece of wire. I have my poles all grounded. So let me see if I can get around back of this barrel and I'll show you. There's my ground rod down there. And that is what they call an earth ground. So I think in Europe they actually, instead of calling it ground, they just call it earthed. So it's been earthed. All right, that's it. Now, these connectors on the solar panels, these panels are tied in parallel. So all the positives are tied together and go in, and all the negatives are tied together and go in. And what did I tell you about that? Okay, when you hook things in parallel, you keep the voltage the same, but you raise the amperage. Okay, so the voltage going in, each panel is a 12-volt panel. The voltage going in is from a 12-volt panel on the positive wire here and the negative wire. So all of those wires, you see there's little tags on there with a little negative sign on it. Some of them have positive signs. One of these pigtail units takes all of the positives, and the other one takes all of the negatives. Now, if I hooked a positive to a negative on 2 panels each, that would convert me to a 24-volt system. And then I could run my system on 24 volts. I could use smaller wires for everything in there, and I would have plenty of voltage. But I wouldn't have the amperage I need for my power tools, like my milling machine and my heavy-duty drill press and things like that. So that's why I went this way. And this is just a different type of a union. And one other thing I forgot to mention is another thing that you want to make sure of. These controllers I'm using up here have them built-in rectifiers, but they also have built-in diodes. And what a diode does, it allows electricity to flow only one direction through a wire. So your incoming wires that come in from your turbine can only put electricity in. They can't take any back the other way. Because if they could, your turbine up there would turn into a motor at night when there was no wind blowing, or during the day when there's no wind blowing, and it would drain your batteries, cranking the motor over. So you have to have diodes built into these things. And the same thing on the solar connections. On that solar connection up there and on the solar connections down at the bottom of the 8 MPPT unit, they put diodes in those so that at nighttime, when there is no sun, it doesn't backfeed electricity back to your solar panels, because your solar panels will use electricity if you don't have diodes in the line. Okay, so remember, rectifier converts AC to DC. Diodes allow electricity to flow only one direction through a wire. It can't go backwards. So those are very important in your wind and solar system. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. I hope I didn't ramble on too long. I have other things. I did take a ride down to the OC and I picked up some stuff. I will do those in another video. I just wanted to get this question answered from my subscriber, Forever North's Plant and Wildlife Sanctuary. And you can look him up on the YouTube and check out his site also. G-Bear, signing off.